Okay, we see a task-based simulation at the Prometric Center. We're scanning, boom. We identify this as an audit documentation task-based simulation. So now we're thinking back and we're building our mental map, right? Never any need to panic. So we know that this is one of the primary documents that you need to understand the context of within the audit engagement. All right, so we have the audit documentation, we have the engagement letter, and we have context within the management representation letter. So it's important to keep in mind that these are all extremely different documents, and they all have entirely different relevancy to the audit engagement. And the audit exam is going to have no mercy on you when they try to trip you up with a question that requires that you understand what to include or exclude in each of these documents. All right, so we got to know the context because they sound familiar. But for the purposes of this sim, we're going to focus on our audit documentation questions. Okay, we remember from our mental map, we have 3 questions: the what, the where, and the for how long. For this sim, we're focused on questions 2 and 3. The where and the for how long. And all we really need to understand is where would specific audit documentation be retained, and for how long will we need to hold on to this documentation? And also, how long will it be required before we complete our documentation? Okay, so we must know that this is our audit documentation, right? This is our work papers based on our notes. And at the end of the day, this is the supporting information for presenting the audit report. So when it comes to the where, there are 2 very important files that we need to understand. We need to understand the current file and the permanent file. The current file is going to hold current information. In other words, information that is related to the current period audit report. And the permanent file is going to hold on to permanent documentation, so information related to the client that has a continuing interest every single year. Okay, so basically information that is never going to change year after year. Okay, so for this sim, we have 5 companies that we need to analyze. And each of those companies will have supporting documentation in each of these exhibits. So we need to take a look at each of these exhibits to determine what type of documentation this is. And we need to use it to identify which file it's going to be retained in. And then we need to take a look at the type of company we have. Right? We have non-issuers, which are our private companies, and we have issuers, which are public companies. And this is going to be important because it's going to help us address question number 3, the for how long. Okay, so at the end of the day, we need to remember that documentation rules are always going to be more strict for the audit of public companies, aka issuers, meaning the information needs to be retained for a longer period of time if this is an issuer. So we need to hold on to the audit documentation for issuers for 7 years and audit documentation for non-issuers, aka private companies, for 5 years. That also means that we need to complete our work papers faster for issuers, right? They're stricter on us if we are auditing an issuer, so in which case we need to complete our work papers within 45 days of the audit report release date if we have audited an issuer, and 60 days for non-issuers, right? Those private companies. Okay, bada bing, bada boom. Let's take a look at each of these companies. All right, so Jane is responsible for several companies during the year ended 12/31 year 3. We got Ramirez Inc., who is a non-issuer, Reed Co., who is an issuer, Gun Co., who is a non-issuer, Kemper Inc., who is a non-issuer, and Morgan Co., who's an issuer. Okay, so let's start by taking a look at the information they gave us for Ramirez Inc., and this looks like an adjusted trial balance. So the adjusted trial balance has to do with current year information that is reported by Ramirez. So if we're using this for our audit documentation, and we know that it has to do with financial information for the current period, then we know that this is going to be held in the current file. Okay, so the current file is correct. Okay, but what about question number 2, the for how long? How long does the auditor need to retain this information, and how long do they need to complete their work papers? Well, we know that rules are going to be stricter for the audit of issuers. Ramirez is a non-issuer. Okay, so we know that the 5 and 7 year rule is going to apply to non-issuers and issuers, so you can't get tripped up with which is which. Non-issuers are going to be less strict rules. So they need to hold on to the audit work papers for 5 years, whereas issuers would need to hold on to them for 7 years. Okay, rules also say that they could take a little bit longer to complete their work papers. We know that we have the 45-day rule and the 60-day rule. So rules say that because we're auditing a non-issuer, we could take a little bit longer. So the auditor would need to complete their work papers within 60 days from the report release date. Okay, what information do we have for Reed Co.? We know that Reed Co. is an issuer, and we know that the Reed Co. exhibit gives us an audit report. All right, so this is the independent audit report for the financial statements of Reed Co. for year 3. Okay, so this is the report for the current year. If we were to document this, where would it go? Well, this would be current year information, right? Because it has to do with the current year report. Okay, so it's going in the current file. And we know that rules are going to be stricter for issuers. So they need to hold on to the audit documentation for a longer period of time. Okay, so they need to hold on to it for 7 years, and they need to complete it faster. Okay, so they're going to have 45 days from the report release date to complete their audit work papers. Okay, so the information related to Gunco, we know Gunco is a non-issuer. If we open up this exhibit, we see that this is Articles of Incorporation of Gunco. Articles of Incorporation is a document that states when the company was incorporated. And this is information that's going to have a continuing interest year after year, right? This is never changing. All right, because they incorporated in the state of Mississippi, this isn't information that's going to change. They will have always incorporated in the state of Mississippi. So it's not information that is related specifically to the current period audit report. So it's going in the permanent file, and it's a non-issuer, so the rules are going to be a little bit less strict when we are addressing the question, the for how long. Okay, so they need to hold on to the work papers for a shorter period of time. All right, so this is a non-issuer, meaning they're going to have to hold on to it for 5 years, not 7 years like they would if they were auditing an issuer. They're also going to have a longer period of time to complete their work papers. It's not an issuer, so we don't need to hurry up and get it done. Okay, so 60 days for Gunco. Kemper Inc., another non-issuer. So what do we got here? We have a shareholders agreement. Okay, so this is permanent information that's going to have continuing interest year after year. All right, so this is information that's never changing. So this is information that should be documented in the permanent file. And because this is a non-issuer, we're going to have less strict rules. So we need to hold on to it for 5 years and wrap up the work papers in 60 days from the audit report release date. Okay, and last but not least, we have Morgan Co., who's an issuer. Okay, if we take a look at the exhibit, we see that this is a property, plant, and equipment audit test work excerpt. So this provides us with information from the substantive tests performed related to PP&E in the current period. So because it's information that we're documenting related to the current period audit report, right, the specific substantive tests performed, that means that this is going to go straight to the current file. But we know it's an issuer, so we know that this is going to have stricter rules. So we need to hold on to this information for 7 years. Okay, so stricter rules also means that we need to wrap up the work papers faster. So we need to have the work papers completed within 45 days from the report release date. Okay, so at the end of the day, again, when it comes to audit documentation, we need to remember our 3 questions: the what, the where, and the for how long. All right, if you're still struggling with this, go back and take a look at our mental map.